Hi, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Jim Fischer and Jenny Mosbacher. It's January 11th, 2020. We're at Scenic Family Farms in Jervis. Thank you both so much for joining us today. Let's start with the most important question. Why wine?
You want to go first?
Sure. My story is less interesting, which is that why wine is because I knew that I probably wasn't going to have a great career out of my art degree, which that's not, I knew that I probably didn't have the chops to make it as a professional artist. So while I was in college, I got a part-time job working in a winery tasting room. So I went to Lewis and Clark College in Portland, and I grew up in the Portland area. I grew up in Beaverton in the suburbs, and to save money going to a nice private college, I lived at home during my college years, and so I was looking to make money, and I answered a Craigslist ad for a part-time tasting room job at Ponzi Vineyards, which at that time was their original tasting room winery, which was 15 minutes from my parents' house, and so super easy commute, and it seemed like a good fit. I knew nothing about wine. I did not grow up in a wine drinking household, but I was interested in it because my kind of line of study in art was kind of environmental art or landscape art, and so I think I was just interested in being in a beautiful setting, and I was really, really into art history and all of the kind of nitty-gritty details that go along with that, and wine really appealed to me because it's so it's so hand in hand with the development of human history, and so I think that the artistry of winemaking really appealed to me. So I got into it from the tasting room side of things. I worked there for 2 summers and just became really, really enamored with it, the way that so many people do. And so I, being in student mode, wanted to learn everything about wine, and so I read as much as I could get my hands on. And the cool thing is that working in a tasting room, that there was a real feeling of this kind of community reciprocity, where if you worked in a tasting room, you could go to other winery tasting rooms and taste for free, because the idea was that they wanted people to have exposure and be able to recommend other wineries. So on my days off, I would go with friends, and we would go taste around and just learn and talk to people, and became really immersed in everything that was wine in the Willamette Valley, which then I became a really, really insufferable 21-year-old who then went from drinking bad box wine at parties to being really into Ponzi's entry level Pinot Noir at the time was $30, and so suddenly you become a very insufferable connoisseur, and that's really great at college parties, as you might know. And so that was my intro into the business. And after working a couple summers for Ponzi, and then I graduated, I wanted to get into it full time, and so then I got another tasting room gig working at Mosbacher. I was really, at that point, after my experience at Ponzi, which was phenomenal, I was really interested in working for a lot of these, the pioneering wineries, the old guard. And so with Ponzi's established in 1970 and Mosbacher in 71, I just wanted to kind of learn from the old school. But at the time, it was very much on just the sales side of things. I think I was interested in the technical aspects of winemaking, but I think that I had a lot of kind of negative self-image about the fact that I am terrible at math and science, just basically scooted by on the bare minimum in college, very much liberal arts, language and fine arts oriented. And so I never, even though I think I thought about making wine, I was not I never endeavored to like really get in on the production side. I worked harvest, so like they would have opportunities for staff to pitch in on like the sorting line and doing really like basic harvest tasks, but nothing beyond that. And that was basically my main gig for several years. So I worked for Sokolblosser in total for like 6 years, and then I met Jim.
And then she met me, and we'll do this like in reverse chronological order.
Yeah,
probably.
I know. Yeah, because you're gonna have to go back.
She and I met in the most, I think, probably normcore, sadly boring. I think like we'll have to make up a better story. We already said that we're gonna tell people in the future that we met in a knife fight or something like that. But we met at Whole Foods, which is really depressing. It's Oof.
But we met.
That's probably my biggest regret in life.
I know, yeah.
Is we could have met somewhere better.
I know.
We should have.
Yeah, we should have rehearsed this before you showed up here today.
So we were. I at the time was working for one of the large distributors for wine that sells mostly kind of wine as
commodity,
widget wine. Let's just say it. And I had scheduled a tasting demo at this Whole Foods. And so I was there pouring my commodity wine, and Jenny was there at the time pouring wine for Sokolblosser, and the wine steward for this particular Whole Foods maybe was a bit of a stony baloney kind of guy, and he goofed and double booked us. So I showed up to pour my wine. There was already somebody there pouring wine, and I was fairly territorial. I was like, "What are you doing here?" And
is that how you remember? Because I thought that he was there first. Is like how I remember.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Either way,
we met in a knife fight.
Yeah.
A knife fight in a Whole Foods.
The steward wasn't
rough.
there, and it was like my day off. It was, I couldn't find someone else to book the tasting, and so because at that point I was like managing the tasting room, and so it was my day off. I was not in a good mood to be there in the first place because this was the summer of 2010. And 2010, as a lot of winemakers will tell you, is kind of the summer that wasn't. It was in some ways a very classically Oregon summer.
It was the first year of January.
Yeah, where you really just the sun never came out. It was kind of cloudy, and it was kind of
it was beautiful.
Yeah, well, it felt like probably April weather, but through most of the summer, and this was it felt like this was the lone day in like mid-July that finally like the sun had come out. And so this was an afternoon tasting, and the store was absolutely dead.
It was the end of June, but it's
end of June. Yeah, okay, end of June. So it was but the point being that I was there, and you book these like 3-hour demos, and so I'm standing in the middle of this Whole Foods wine section, and there is hardly a soul in the store. The steward isn't there, and I am about at like 50 paces staring at Jim across the wine aisle, because they didn't want to say like, okay, like one of us goes home. They were like, well, we've got 2 people pouring wine, let's just have 2 people pouring wine. And so I was pouring wine on my end, he was pouring wine on his end, and vying for like all of the 5 customers that came in over the 3-hour period. And I was, again, like very cranky about it.
It's true. And so ultimately, even though the big company that I worked for also sold the Sokolblosser wines, I went over to Jenny and I pretended that I was unfamiliar with their wines, which, to be honest, I probably wasn't as familiar as I should have been with the wines.
And then this just reinforced my negative stereotype of this like kind of guy who works for a big distributor, where I'm like, of course you sell our wines and you know nothing about our wines.
Like, do you know about Franzia?
Yeah, I was very indignant.
Pays the bills.
And not interested in talking to him.
So anyway, we definitely did the opposite of hit it off, I think. But I filed that in the mental folder of somebody that I should try to reconnect with. And
he gave me his business card.
I gave her my business
card. Which was
card.
like a very not smooth move.
Yeah, no, when you work for one of those big distributors, it's not really cool. So you don't really give out the business cards very often. It's not like a
And I didn't have.
it's kind of disappointing when you hand somebody that.
Yeah, and I didn't have my own business cards on me. I had like
No.
free tasting room passes, like to give out to people as they're tasting. And so I think I just, when we had first introduced ourselves, I said my name, and that was it.
So, and then the story of our very normcore relationship.
This is the really depressing part.
Yeah, so it started
If
at
that
Whole
wasn't bad
Foods, and then the knife fight never happened. But I found her on Facebook, and I messaged her, and yeah, that's actually maybe
wow,
that's the
just
depressing
like
part.
the really like
And so
womp womp.
we
like,
so we started seeing each other. Let's just fast forward through the boring portion.
Oh
So we
sure.
started
You
seeing each
don't
other.
want to fast forward.
Yeah.
So when he had first reached out to me, I was like, "Who is this person?" Because Jim Fischer, which is just like a very generic name,
Yeah.
and we had one mutual friend in common on Facebook, which was Cameron Winery. So and so I was like, and it said he was from Rickreall, Oregon, and so I was like. Maybe someone in wine, but I don't know. I'm not going to accept this friend request. Also, because I didn't recognize him because his little profile image at the time was.
Well, I mean, I probably didn't think this through when I messaged her very well. My profile picture was in fact a picture of me, but it was me as a child. And to kind of set the stage, my parents had a carpeted bathroom, which just makes no sense on any level. And the bathroom carpet was bright blue, and the wallpaper was like this kind of like cream and blue accented like seashell print. And the pictures of me also in blue sweatpants top and sweatpants on the toilet. Sweatshirt, yeah, sweatpants top, sweatshirt.
Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Sweatshirt and sweatpants, sitting on the toilet, doing my best work, listening to a Walkman that my parents obviously found so amusing at the time that they took a picture of, and I used that as my Facebook profile picture. So when she received a friend request from what looked like a 7-year-old going to the bathroom in a carpeted bathroom, which I think that was probably the turnoff, because you're like, I don't trust anyone in a carpeted bathroom. Fair.
Yeah.
So she didn't respond, but eventually, I think
You wore me down.
I wore you down. That's really what it was.
Yeah.
And so we started seeing each other, and this is kind of the reverse chronological order of it. I guess we're starting more at the late end. And so then I got fired from said distributor job, which at the time was certainly a bit of a blow to my ego. But I used to work in Hollywood in a kind of tangentially related to film production job. And one of my coworkers always said that in Hollywood they say that you should never hire anyone that hasn't been fired twice. And so I was like halfway there. So I figured I'm on to something.
Yeah.
So
the other firing will come later.
yeah, I fire myself every day. I'm my own boss now, so that's great. But I was able to use kind of this moment of free time to start figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And so to backtrack now, to kind of go to the beginning of the story and how this all kind of dovetails, hopefully together, is that when I was in high school, my family, who had about 200 acres, and it's not just my parents, it's my aunt and uncle and my grandparents that all lived on this 200 acres. And it kind of sounds like a family compound or commune when I say it like that, but it's like not like Branch Davidian. It's much more benign, and so it's all zoned EFU. My dad had a job working for the federal government. My mom worked in retail for 30 years, and so they didn't have any time to farm the land actively, and they were leasing out the fields that they had to other farmers, but they wanted to do something. They'd always had an interest in gardening and farming. My dad is certainly obsessive about gardening. For example, when I was in middle school, he planted one rose bush, and he entered one of the cuttings from the rose in kind of one of these, I guess they have like rose cutting competitions, which was a new thing to me at that age.
Like a county fair?
Yeah, but it was at the Lancaster Mall. So he went to the Lancaster Mall and brought this rose cutting from his one rose bush, and he won an award, and he was hooked. So then like within a year, we had something like 90 rose bushes in the yard, and he worked in Portland. So my job all summer was to take care of all of these rose bushes, which I did a terrible job. It was not good.
Resentfully.
I was resentfully, like, so deadheading them, watering them all summer long. And so my dad's always been into gardening. and been kind of obsessive about things like that. So the land is zoned EFU, so we needed to do something, and they wanted to do something. So as a family, we came with this notion that we would plant a vineyard, and we selected the least fertile, most shallow soiled portion of the vineyard as kind of the test plot, thinking that if we could grow grapevines on this miserable, horrible tract of land, that we could grow grapevines on the rest of the property. And so we set about as a family during my senior year of high school, collecting winter pruning wood from neighboring vineyards, cutting that apart into little lengths, potting them. We started our own nursery. So we had thousands and thousands of plants, and then the following winter, which was my freshman year of college, on winter break, we went and laid out the first block and planted that first vineyard portion, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And at the time, I was incredibly resentful because I had no interest in wine. It was cold. It was December.
Miserable, yeah.
And I was like, I could just be inside playing video games, which is way more fun. So that was kind of my first impression of wine and grapes. And
This sucks.
This sucks. And
where was
oh,
was
sorry,
this?
yeah. So this is in Rickreall.
In Rickreall, okay.
So this is on the kind of southwestern slope of the Eola Hills. And for me as a little kid growing up there was always kind of cool because it is on this uplifted portion of the old ocean floor. And so when I was a little kid growing up there, I'd always go dig in the dirt. And the soil is very shallow, so I wouldn't have to dig very far. And you would find just lots and lots of fossil clams everywhere. And that will, I think, ultimately become important later for how we decided to name our brand. But after college, I did lots of different things. I lived in Japan for 3 years teaching English, and then I moved to Los Angeles and I lived there for 2 years. And then finally, as is the pillar of privilege via nepotism, I got a job working in the wine industry for the big distributor, unnamed distributor.
Because his older brother.
My older brother was a brand manager there, and so I decided to move home, get a job, and my brother got me a job there, and then we met at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got into the wine industry. Yeah.
Yeah.
We met at a knife fight. Yeah.
I think I'm just going to give, since your one mutual friend was Cameron, I'm just going to give John Paul the credit.
I really think so.
you.
It's probably fair.
Because it was like, that's like how I felt. I was like, well, okay, like that was my first, like, I guess if he's good enough to be friends with the winery on Facebook, because that was like before, like, this is just sounds like ridiculous, but it was like before the age of like, you'd have your business pages and stuff. So like if you were a business.
First name Cameron, last name winery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, thanks to him.
Yeah, and so as soon as I got fired from the big distributor job and pondering what I wanted to do with my life, I thought, here is an opportunity. By this point now, I had really developed an interest in wine. And I knew that the program at Schmecada was truly a world-class program. Even at that time, still, it was the last year of the original teachers. Was my first year there, and so it was great to have class with Al McDonald and hear him talk about Seven Springs, and then eventually once he left, having classes with Jessica Cortell, and then when Barney left, having classes with Jesse Sandrock, and all these people that I think taught me so much about growing grapes and making wine, and that kind of really, I mean, how did we even decide that we were going to start making wine? I don't even remember.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like, I think that the thought of it just developed so kind of randomly or organically. A lot of it was that, so at this point in 2011, his family's vineyard had become established, and so it was producing fruit. But his dad, who is, as Jim has described, like a very obsessive gardener, and he's a really great farmer, he doesn't really have a lot of connections to people in the wine business. And so he was reaching this critical juncture where he had all of these very carefully farmed grapes, but no homes for them. And so kind of hatched this like harebrained idea of like, well, because of our connections in the wine industry, because of all the people I had met working in the Valley and meeting other people who work for wineries, we had this thought of like, how can we connect, like use those connections to get some of those winemakers whom we really like and respect to work with the fruit, like, or just anyone who we felt like that would give the grapes, I think, the kind of respect that we felt like that it deserved. And at that point, Jim's dad had been selling grapes to other wineries, but they were typically going into like Willamette Valley level blends, and so there was nothing that really showcased the vineyard in total. And because it didn't really have a name or anything that would make anyone want to make a single vineyard wine out of this, we realized that the only way to accomplish that was to do it ourselves, which was really the hubris of that is astounding. Like at that point,
we'll just make a wine.
We'll just make a wine
and we'll help
that's
them
so
out.
good
that people
are going to say, yeah, this vineyard is really good,
Yeah.
and I'm going to want to buy grapes from it. And looking back on that,
How hard
just
could it be?
illogical like chain of events. But yeah, so that was how it started. So we thought, okay, we're going to make like a business card in a bottle. So we're going to take a ton of fruit that his dad is effectively going to like gift us for it's almost like a marketing expense. So we would take that ton of fruit and then we would find a place to make the wine. And so we worked with a small winery not too far from his parents' place in that basically was stewarded that initial vintage for us. So it was like a trade that we would give the winemaker the grapes, and then he would make the wine, and Jim could get hands-on experience with the production side of things.
Yeah, and then that was coupled with at the same time starting Schmecada. At that same time, so I started at Schmecada in 2011, and
2011 was an auspicious vintage to
start,
begin making wine in Oregon.
Certainly.
But in some ways, I feel like that it reinforced everything that I had learned in tasting wine and gleaning information from all of these older wineries. Was that even though there were elements of it that were very unusual, that 2011 in a weird way had so many characteristics about it that are more true to the prior 30 plus years of Oregon history at that point than what we've seen in the last 10. And so in that way, like, I feel like it reinforced for me that this is like I want to be part of that chronology of winemaking. That I want to make wine that I feel like is representative of like Oregon climate. And 2011 was...
You're a glutton for punishment.
Yeah. I mean, I am with you, so like...
Yeah, fair.
So
you met at a knife fight, so I figure. Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely an interesting start, because I'm thinking, when did we harvest our ton in 2011?
October 29th.
Yeah, so you don't see those late October harvests anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, if it goes into early October now, that feels pretty good. And so yeah, that was the start of it, and the wine didn't suck. And we also realized that on the face of it, like 1 ton, you're like, 1 ton, like this makes like 50-ish cases, like that's no big deal. But the idea that then, again, the just illogic of it, that we were going to make 50 cases of wine and that this was going to be our like business card and we would give it to people. Well, I don't know.
I know like 2 people and you're one of them. I'm the other one. So I don't know who I'm going to give this to.
And so suddenly we realized that like we had become way in over our heads immediately. And so we thought, okay, well, now I guess we got to sell it.
So that was kind of then led us to go from this business card idea, which I think felt okay and novel-ish, to then a more serious approach to it, which realizing that we've already laid the groundwork to have something that we can sell. And what's a more effective way to get the name of the vineyard out there than to put it on a package and get it into consumers' hands. And I think we, especially for me, working on the distributor side, moving commodity wine, and then Jenny working for these kind of pioneering family wineries here in the Willamette Valley, we come up with some fairly, I think, clear goals of what we wanted to accomplish with the brand. We had realized that we exist at this really wonderful time in the Willamette Valley where across the board wine quality is higher than ever. There really are very few of those kind of more homespun experiences of going to a barn and trying wine, and it's a real roll of the dice of whether or not you might get botulism from it, which chemically is not possible, just to clarify. But, you know, so across the board, wine is great, but it struck us that, so if we can assume that right away, if people are making really high quality Pinot Noir, how can we hope to compete? What can we do? What can we, how can we stand out? And so we realized that branding, marketing, and conveying a story in a succinct 144 character and or image manner was going to be a huge portion of how we would try to stand out in the marketplace. And to wit, we got really lucky that one of our friends runs a local design firm, local as in Portland, and we were able to, we were fortunate to be able to work with them on our first ever label design, and they've been with us ever since.
Yeah, and it helped us through the really painfully iterative process of coming up with a name, because you don't, I guess, I mean, I just think that probably most normal people don't realize that, like, you're like, how to come up with a cool name is impossible, because if it's cool, someone else is already using it. So I think we probably, I mean, like, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we went through probably like 300 different, like, just brainstorming all these different things, and then because of the time and because we had run out of ideas, we landed on the kind of now like dreaded
ampersand name.
Like, which
we joke that I can't wait till somebody sues us and we can like change our name to like Knife Fight Winery or something like that.
Yeah, you know. And so I think
it's coming.
And so we, at the very least, we tried to make it come back to the vineyard itself. I mean, we knew that there were certain things that we did not want. We did not want to use French words. I don't know French. He doesn't know French.
Only the swear words.
Only the good stuff. Yeah. You know, and so the idea of calling it a domain or chateau or something just felt really like silly and grandiose, or like a cellar's, like we don't
own a cellar.
Yeah,
we don't own anything really.
We don't. I mean, I guess like by legal definition we are a winery, but like I feel
we've never owned our own space to make wine in.
Yeah. I am a millennial. I don't own anything. Like
we live in a studio apartment.
Like we rent. So it's
I drive a subcompact car.
Yeah. So I think that they're like,
it's old.
We knew that the name had to be, I think, reflective of, in some way, just the basics, which was that the vineyard itself is planted on basically an ancient piece of the ocean floor.
Yeah, well, that came back to that, where I would, as a child, dig up fossils.
Yeah, and so that was, and I think that was sort of the inspiration, that we knew that if the core of the mission of making this wine was to showcase the vineyard itself, then the name should be reflective of that. And so the fossil part is that basically it's the piece of property that his parents planted on, or that he and his parents planted on, is an uplifted piece of the ocean floor from like the Oligocene. I mean, it's like 15 million year old plus, and yet still has like little recognizable fossil like clams. And
I found one scallop one time. Yeah.
Bivalves.
Bivalves, definitely.
And then the Fawn portion of it is a little more, I don't know, a little funnier, where it's the vineyard itself
like
is
funny, haha.
I don't know. It's because it's a weird, like a give and a take type relationship with the Fawn portion of it. So the vineyard is planted, and surrounding it on three sides is old oak forest. So of the 200 acres of the property that your parents own, a very small proportion of it had historically been cleared for farming use. But the majority of it is
Old growth oak forest.
yeah, and now, and it's interesting because now I think there's a lot more awareness of the fact that these old oak forests are kind of an endangered ecology within the Willamette Valley, because so much of it has been cleared over the past, now 150 years for agriculture. And so having that is kind of special, and it adds to this really interesting kind of character and biodiversity of the site. But it's also because of the sort of rarity of these kind of environments, now you have this really intense, kind of unusual concentration of wildlife like deer. And so the deer, we have a love-hate relationship with the deer. The love is that they're really cute, and fair is fair, they were there first. But then the bad news, of course, is that they also are the kind of the antagonists in the story of vineyards, where they like to break their way into the vineyards and eat the little growing tips on the vines.
I don't know if you've seen the movie based on the book Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton.
Wow.
But there are
A little indie hit, I remember.
We fight about it because Jurassic Park is one of my favorite films, and he's like, the book was better. Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I do that. I'm that person.
Yeah, you are that person.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't like it.
But the deer are they're very smart, because they have a lot of they're intelligent in the ways that they can survive.
They're just like the velociraptors. They just walk around the perimeter of the fence and always look for weaknesses. And it's not for malicious intent. Usually they want to break into the vineyard in late spring to have their young. And so usually a pregnant mother will break in and have her fawns. And I don't know if deer are like salmon, but I want to think that they are. And so then the following year, when those deer have matured, they like to do the same thing, break back into the vineyard, have their young, and so on and so forth.
Come back to spawn.
Yeah, and in the meantime, when they're there, they just go nuts, and so they do tremendous amounts of damage in the vineyard. And so my dad is constantly, I think, the majority of his job, beyond just growing grapes, is just fence repair.
Yeah. And chasing deer out.
Chasing deer, a lot of chasing. If you ever, I've never been misguided enough to think that I was cool, but if you ever really want to feel like a fool, go try to chase a deer out of a vineyard, because you're like waving your arms over your head, screaming, and like honking a horn in a car, and it's a sad sight.
The deer is just giving you that look.
The deer is just looking at you like, no. You cannot sit at my lunch table.
Yeah.
And so,
but then at the flip side, it's like we would never once you have seen like a baby fawn, like it's the most adorable thing you've ever seen. It's a puppy with on stilts, like basically.
I think of it as like a kitty on stilts.
Or kitty on stilts, yeah. Like and they're amazingly adorable. So you could never ever dream of wanting to like harm them. And so it's it's a defensive mode of like just repairing the fences and kind of just dealing with the fact that this is vineyard life. So yeah, Fossil and Fawn, that's the name.
I don't know if that even answers why wine, but I'm not sure.
Oh, that was the last question.
That was a long time.
Yeah, why
wine? Yeah. So that's Fossil and Fawn.
Tell me about, you mentioned that like you kind of realized right away you're kind of in over your head with what you initially thought you were doing in the wine business, or in the creating wine business at least. So tell me about, once you've realized that you have to sell your wine, you have to create a brand. Tell me about those steps, the creating the labels, deciding on your mission, deciding on how you're going to sell your wine and make your wine, and where and how.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was just born out of necessity of like, well, we got to find a space, we've got to do, you have to check all the boxes on at least the production side of things.
I think for me, it's kind of, I think when I was younger, when I was in high school, I was in a band, and the band was terrible, or really bad. But we would play like the local VFW and things like that, and I thought it was pretty cool. And I realized that the only reason I wanted to be in a band was clearly not for music, because I was terrible at that. But I just wanted to have a merch table. I just wanted to have like stickers and T-shirts and like some kind of takeaway. And so I think that I've always been interested in design, and I've been interested in branding. I wanted to maybe like when I was doodling in class, I'd be like drawing my name in bubble letters. I wanted that to look cool or something. So I've always been thinking about that, and I think that whenever I'm driving and I catch myself, I'm thinking about winemaking all the time, but I'm also frequently thinking about branding and thinking about designs and posters and labels and things like that I want to do. And
which is sort of ironic because I have the art degree, but I feel like that my interests in art are definitely more of the, like, I'm not good at graphic design, and like I am bad at doing art on the computer, and so that I think I always knew from the get-go that we would need like outside help for that aspect of it.
Yes.
That I just like wither the thought of like drawing our own labels. Although I'm going to try to do that this year, which seems like a bad idea. But I just think that, so we knew that we wanted like outside help, and we did have this friend that like I had met like years ago in a completely like different job, and she and her business partner had launched this design studio, and when she heard that we were making wine and we were going to make it commercially, like I think that it was just like obvious, like of course we're going to work with you, which was just really fantastically fortuitous for us because they're really good at it. And they also at that point were working with people who like they were doing branding for businesses that are just far larger and have way more budget than we could ever conceive of. So they were also down with giving us like the bro deal. So they were like, yeah, of course, like we want experience. Like we had never made a wine label before, and so we've now learned over time that that's like a very common thing, that if you're like a design firm, that you kind of do these things like on spec to build out your portfolio, which just felt just so, at first it felt very wrong to me because as someone who is trained like in the arts, like something that you're just repeatedly told is to like really try to fight for your own like value and to not just give it away for free. And you know, how many times does an artist get approached, you know, for exposure is ridiculous. And so, but in this case, they were really like, yeah, like we'll charge you some money, but really we want to do this because we like you and we want to help establish this. And I think they had a better, longer reaching vision than we even had at the time, where they knew that by kind of getting the ball rolling for us, that we would then be their like customers for life, you know, and that's still like now, even though we have used the opportunity of winemaking to work with other artists that we are excited about, like that they still, like Factory North, the design firm, like still designs like our core labels and other things.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going back to the idea of being in over our heads.
Every day.
Sometimes not as much anymore, which is good. But definitely at the start, I think I had a job interview for a wine job, and the interviewer asked me what our case production was like. And so when we first started in 2011, we made 53 cases, and basically every year since then we've done our best to double production. And so this year now we're up to about, so for 2019 we're up to about 2,000 cases. And at that time when I had this interview for a wine job, the interviewer asked me, well, how many cases do you make? And I said at that time it was we were looking to make somewhere like around 300 to 400 at that particular time. And they responded by saying, well, you know, I mean, there's 356 days in a year. Do you think that you can sell a case a day? And it was an interesting thought because I'd never really considered it in such a, as Jenny's mentioned, she is not good at math.
Yeah,
you're fine with that. I don't mean to
no, yeah, you're not
drive over you in the bus.
Thanks.
But I am also not great at math, and so when you have somebody
the gravity of it like,
point out to you like selling a case a day, and so because at that time it was basically just me driving around in my aforementioned subcompact car in Portland or in other places, knocking on doors, cold calling people, lukewarm calling people, but never warm calling, never anyone saying please come in. Usually it's just, you know, that kind of facing rejection constantly, which everyone loves. And so I guess I was daunted by the fact, feeling right then like, do I think I could sell a case of wine every day? And feeling a little uneasy. Of course, the interviewer was like, "Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, case a day, easy, no problem, easy." But in truth, it resonated with me because I realized that on our own, with me only knowing 2 people and Jenny being one of them and me being the other, that it was going to be hard for me to sell that much wine. So we, I don't really know. I guess I feel like in some ways we really lucked into a lot of things.
Yes,
more than anything.
Oh yeah, it's
just luck.
Dumb
all luck.
Like the first vintage, like once we released the 2011 after it had been bottled and we had settled on the labeling and everything, we got a really lucky break where there was a wine shop in Portland that picked it up for like one of their like newsletters, and it was right around the holidays. Yeah, it was December. They put in their December newsletter. We had never really sold a bottle of wine to like hardly any other person at that point, and they ended up buying like
2/3 of it.
Yeah,
right away.
Yeah, it was like 30 cases.
So we sold 2/3 of our first release in one go, which felt lucky.
Yeah,
for sure.
That they had taken a chance on us. But I think also a lot of it is that we're like we're not making wine for, and we're not designing our brand for basically anyone but ourselves. And that sounds, that's like, I feel like that the part where this really, even though wine is not true art in the way that just like painting paintings is, but it is in the way that we approach it, and that like, even though we're making it at a commercial volume, I'm not thinking like, oh, well, I have to make this wine this way, or I have to design the label this way to appeal to a specific person. It's incredibly selfish process where we just do it to basically just please ourselves. And
I'm almost inspired by trying to make wines that I hope people don't like.
And it's weird because somehow
really,
we still
maybe.
always find the audience.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, and that was maybe a lesson in that, because our first label was the kind of initial concept of it felt very, it was a label that without fail, it was like an age test, like where like
Sure.
you would show it to, if it was like someone under the age of 40, they were like, this is super rad. If you showed it to anyone who is like our parents' age, they would immediately be like, I don't get it, or this is
Where's
weird,
the
or we
gold
don't
foil?
like it. Yeah, like because it was
Where's the
it was
embossing?
dark, it was black and white, and it was like a collage of like
A sunken ghost ship?
Yeah, it was like, and it had and this was a little bit like kind of a winky thing of that we did design the label in a way like a Burgundy label, in the sense that the appellation and the variety, which I guess like not really truly Burgundian, but in the sense that it had a more French wine label style, and that front and center is the like where it's from and what it is. And then our name was
Quite
small, tiny print at the bottom. And over we would effectively, old people would be like, why is your name so small?
Sure.
And I don't understand, because from our perspective, especially having now experience on the sales side of things, either commodity wines or nice Oregon wines, was that people, if you're in the grocery store and you maybe don't know a lot about wine, you do, like, the name Fossil and Fawn is not going to mean anything to you. What is going to mean something to you is that this is an Oregon Pinot Noir. And so why not make that information really front and center? And yeah, I just feel like that's we've always kind of gone in a weird direction that way. And true to it, like, we always find people who are down with it.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I think we're lazy in terms of marketing, which is, when I hear people who work for wineries where they are the winemaker by job title and they are tasked with making wine for somebody else's palate, I have tons of respect for that, because
you could never do it.
I couldn't do that, and I would not want to do that. So the laziness is just that we make wine for ourselves and we design wine for ourselves, and hope that there are other woebegone individuals enough like us that might take a chance on
are
it.
into it.
Yeah.
And I think that has also fueled a lot of the winemaking direction for us, is that over time it really has emboldened us to be more experimental, because of this, I kind of, like, in a weird way, like, how much can we get away with? And So like last year, we made a skin contact Gewurztraminer.
Which is an idea we stole.
Yeah, granted, yeah. There's nothing in my
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, it's everything. It's good and good artists steal.
Yeah.
But so we did a skin contact Gewurztraminer, which first of all, like Gewurztraminer, not a super popular wine in the market.
It's coming back. It's coming back. It's gonna be big.
We're part of that comeback. And then to make it skin contact, but then not only that, but to rest it on its skins for
over 8 months.
Yeah, like, and so in that way, we thought, what the hell, we're gonna do this because it's a challenge to ourselves,
Sure.
and we thought it would be fun and probably a little funny,
and why not?
And
no one anymore. I mean, it's so hard that, especially in the domestic market, no one likes Gewurztraminer. I mean, the amount of hate that people have for it is almost, it's not almost, it is visceral, and it's unusual. It's where people look at you and they just have these terrible assumptions about it.
Yeah, they're like almost offended that you would have made it and brought it into like their sphere. But then, so we made this wine thinking like, we didn't make that much of it.
No.
Well, again, like, it's funny because like how much we made was basically like for us in 2011 would have been most of the production.
More than.
Yeah, that's right, because it was a little over 50.
We made 73 cases of it.
Yeah, and so it's so I think now we have a little bit, because we're a little bigger and we have a little bit more name recognition, we can kind of get away with this. But we thought, but even then we're like, we might be hung with these 70 cases of Gewurztraminer, and who knows. And we just, like, it was basically like allocated, like people tasted it, which we were thrilled about, but also like befuddled, I suppose.
So then this year we doubled production on it, and it'll probably sell out quickly as well again.
So it's
I expect.
like built on a dare. That's really our part of the philosophy, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that so we created a motto, which we should probably put on our walls to inspire us constantly. Because I think of other wineries that have like really like meaningful mottos on the wall. Like at EIO, I think I haven't been, but I've just seen it on Instagram, that it says everything matters. I think that's what that one says. And then at Walter Scott, it has I don't know, like
he has like a quote or something.
Like it's Henri Jayer or something like that. I probably even said that wrong.
Yeah.
On the wall. It's some of them are very
or
like.
You set yourself like a kind of a like company mission, like where you're like, we're gonna make world class wines with a sense of place
But that just didn't feel like us.
Because it's kind of like a duh. Like, who isn't trying to make? I mean, like, good wine. I mean, maybe that.
Good is the enemy of great, Jenny.
Yeah. Or also maybe
if you're not getting better, you're getting worse.
Yeah. Maybe also our motto should be, or like maybe like the like oblique strategy should be to try to make bad wine.
There we are. So. Our motto just became "Get Weird, Suck Less," which just is the inspiration for everything that we do. In the sense that we have yet to find wines that we made that ended up that way by accident, or even wines that we made strange on purpose. Yet we have yet to find that outer wall of people who are opposed to that or turned off by that. I mean, not to say that the wines that we make are for everyone. In fact, we don't want them to be for everyone.
Right.
But and then the Suck Less is based on this notion that now we've been releasing wine for 11 years, and we have one chance a year to make wine. And I think about any job that I've ever had, and I've had some weird jobs, and how many days of doing that job it takes before you feel competent or confident even in doing that job.
Really, I mean,
and the amount of screw up it takes. And now imagine if you only got to do that job essentially one time a year. For us, it's been that kind of ongoing mission of every year trying desperately to get better and stewing on the mistakes.
Because you have it's such a long feedback loop, so you have so much time to think about everything that you wish you had done differently, or this and that, and so you try not to beat yourself up too much, but also then try to.
Oh, I beat myself up hard.
Well, yeah, you do, but how to refine the process in a meaningful way instead of just saying like, oh, I shouldn't have screwed that up, or I wish I had done this differently. It's like, well, don't just wish, like, then try to do it. Like, so the suck less is that you're like, it's the progress, not perfection. You're never, you can't. Like, who can become a master winemaker if you're making, even if some of the oldest winemakers are, have maybe 40 vintages under their belts. And so it's this idea of like, you're still going to make mistakes, and that just you just have to accept that that's part of the process, but just maybe try not to make the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say same mistake twice. Maybe don't make the same mistake 3 times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. Yeah.
And we
Give yourself a wide berth there.
also, we haven't had the good fortune that some of the other winemakers you've interviewed that have had mentors that have worked with somebody like the people that we look up to, the Myron Redfords, the David Letts, those kind of people. We've never had anyone like that in our lives, and so we've learned by reading and by going to school and by doing and making lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
And so probably the mistakes are our mentors. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a sad thing.
And I think also having
I look up to
a
them.
community of winemakers who are also kind of in our same, like I'm going to say young winemakers, but I don't mean the age of the winemakers, but just where they're at in their careers. They're like people who similarly maybe have been making wine for like a dozen years, and we're kind of so it's like having the combination of like the old guard to like look up to and learn about and experience, but you're sort of experiencing it like in absentia. Like I don't have the mentor who's like in the cellar with me, but I can learn from them. But then we also have like our cohort of people who are making wine, kind of in the same feel.
That is definitely, one of the benefits for how we have started our business, which is, I think now fairly common across the country, the model of renting space and having cooperative spaces. And that's essentially how we've had to run our business, because we don't have the capital to buy a space or buy equipment, especially not starting out. And as our business has grown, we've been able to buy more things, but it's been almost entirely organic in the sense of, we don't have a angel investor.
Right. We had to earn the money in order to spend the money. It's not like that. And in fact, this was a big year for us, because this is the first year that we even took out a very small commercial loan, which is a big step for us to build this. I mean, the one thing that we did have an enormous privilege in getting us started was the fact that we had Jim's family to then kind of at first loan us the grapes or gift us the grapes, and then it became a really like flexible loan process where we could pay Jim's dad for the fruit on very, very favorable terms for ourselves, and not so much for him.
I mean, it took us 8 years to become profitable.
Yeah.
So that was pretty tough. And, I think that learning process, though, of not having our own space has been hugely instrumental, because we haven't had that real mentor, but what we've had is a lot of other people surrounding us, doing cool things, making mistakes, and then that has allowed us to borrow from that and learn from that as well. So we, for example, have found a love of Gewurztraminer, which is something that we've learned entirely from our friend the Maloufs, and we love Chardonnay, and it's not necessarily we've worked at any place that's made a lot of Chardonnay, but I always think of like the Irish Chardonnays, for example, of being kind of a hallmark for us of something that's been inspiring us to try to find specifically older clonal material for making Chardonnay. We love Pinot Noir because we're both from Oregon, and we think that Oregon grows some of the best Pinot Noir in the world. And so as much as we're also still making fun, goofy, kooky wines, we're also still really interested in making classical terroir-driven expressions of Chardonnay,
where
Pinot
we're
Noir,
from.
Things that express where we're from.
And even something like a 8-month skin fermented Gewurztraminer, maybe it's not classical per se, but like it's still a wine of terroir for like in terms of like, we're we're making this to express where it is from. And I think that, and last year we were working with a vineyard called Sunnyside Vineyard, and I think that the wine tastes like that vineyard. This year we're working with different fruit, and I think that it'll taste different, even though
100%.
the process is I mean, some of that's vintage, but some of it's the places themselves. So even if we are making these kind of like kooky wines, as you say, like I think that we're still serious about the winemaking process, even if we are having fun while doing so.
I'm curious, you mentioned been about a decade or a dozen years or so in the industry, and you talked about you especially working with the pioneer families, and so you come into the industry, and I'm curious if there's an impulse to, when you're talking about that experimentation, is there an impulse to kind of push against that classic? Is there an impulse to push against like the pioneering
I mean, I
style?
feel like the pioneering style, like in some ways, like the pioneering style, if you will, was like the true innovation, because you have people coming to a place where there was no history of, or at least a deep history of viticultural practice. I mean, there definitely were wineries and vineyards here for those planted in the past 100 years. But I think that you had someone like. We will probably mention David Lett many times throughout this, because he's like a big kind of a personal like touchstone for us in terms of like someone who was the greatest innovator that came and did something kind of out of nothing, and also I think had a very artistic heart in the way that he approached winemaking. That someone who did all these kind of weird and experimental things in his own right, but then also to me like the true artist, where he made wines that he thought were really good and then never released them. And I think like to me that's like I feel like that there's like I wish I were in some ways like a legitimate enough like artist at winemaking to like do stuff like that. Like I just like it's. To me, that's really cool and enviable. And I think that and the other kind of early winemakers doing kind of similar things where they were just kind of doing it off the cuff. But I think that it's like in a way we're maybe part of like the third wave. So then you had these early kind of scrappy beginners at it, and then from there you had the second wave kind of come into like from like the 90s through like the 2000s that really established Oregon as like a serious wine region. And I mean, I think that I don't know if I want to say that we're like bucking like against that, but I think that it started to birth more of like the prestige wineries where you had interest from other places. So you had wineries that or people who had established wineries like in California or Washington or France that then came to Oregon and helped to give it this like sense of legitimacy, where I guess I don't feel like that it ever needed that, but I'm privileged to just get to enjoy what came from all of that groundwork laying. But I think that it is hard where you have a region that is still relatively young in the scheme of winemaking, compared to like a place like France, and you get constant comparisons. Like Oregon is New World, but we make Burgundian style wines. What the hell does that mean? Like it doesn't, like we make Oregon wines, like we don't make Burgundian wines, and I've had Burgundy that tastes really like rich and tannic or fruity, and then I've had ones that are like light and ethereal, and so it's like it's not like this weird thing of like it's this monumentality of like this means something. I find to be really.
It's not even a conversation that I'm interested in, because I don't feel like you need to legitimize yourself by comparison. I think that it stands on its own. I don't know, this is vaguely tangential, but it ties in, and I promise I'll get back to it. But so Jenny and I spend a lot of time watching YouTube. And so
that's a sad admission.
Yeah, I hope this states well. And so so the Liquor Control Board of Ontario has this collection of videos where they obviously are the world's largest buyer of alcohol, so they have huge amounts of money to spend on having this guy travel the world and go to wine regions and talk about what happens there.
Charming as heck.
Yeah,
It's a weird thing because
It's
it was
charming,
like
sure.
it was like, but it was filmed in
But
like
he
the mid 2000s,
so he
and it
visits-
looks like it's like from the 80s.
So yeah, so he visits all these wine regions. He finally makes it to the U.S. When he's in Europe, like he's very specific, focuses on like has like 3 videos alone just on the villages of Burgundy, which is great. But he gets to Oregon, and we don't even get our own video. It's Oregon and Washington lumped together. California at least got its own video, fair enough. But it's just interesting watching because they were all filmed roughly around the same time. What wineries were like in California in the early 2000s or late 90s.
I think it was early 2000s.
Maybe early 2000s. And what wineries were like in Washington in the early 2000s. And it's just a very, very different cultural world that as a native Oregonian, like watching the people from Oregon that represent Oregon. So it's David Lett, David Adelsheim, and Dick Erath that are interviewed.
Yes, yeah.
And then also Myron has his own standalone portion. And you watch that
fantastic.
and you're just like, these are the people I want to be like. Like, it's
Because
cool.
all of the California and Washington ones, well, maybe not all of them, but mostly it was like their.
It wasn't even
like,
the proprietor. It was like assistant head of like subcontinental marketing for Eastern like Washington. Or like it was just like a really long title. It was like, who
or
is
they
this
had
person?
like the VP of sales, or like they're
Yeah.
like the brand ambassador or something. It was like it really gave you this feel of
That wine is marketing.
yeah, or like in the very kind of like corporatized
Yes.
like wine, even if these were like very like fine wines and they're great wineries, whatever, but it still had this weird like sense of removal, versus then he has this round table with like all like the old dogs, like, and it was super
David,
cool.
David, and Dick.
Yeah.
And then Myron on his
yeah.
own, because he probably didn't want to sit down with the rest of them or something. I don't know. But it was incredible. Like, and you watch this and you're like, everyone has heart. And to me, that was inspiring. So I don't necessarily feel like that's a thing to buck against. I feel like that's a thing that I watch and I'm inspired by. That being said, as we talk about kind of how things have progressed in Oregon, how Pinot Noir is at a higher level than it's ever been, winemaking is at a higher level than it's ever been. But certainly one of the things that's been important to help legitimize Oregon, but is kind of the prestige wine movement of the people who have a Tuscan villa in Dundee or something like that, where you're like, it's a different kind of thing. And it's been great, honestly, to elevate the brand of Oregon, even if the thing that they're making is not something that I find
like personally enjoyable. Yeah, but I do think that it has caused this interesting
but it's not the LCBO people that have heart. It's not that to me either.
But I do think that a lot of that has added towards this really interesting moment right now, where because of this singular push on Pinot Noir and being this Pinot Noir wine region, and we're so Burgundian and all of this thing.
Drink Oregon, think Pinot. Or was it?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
that's
and
wrong.
it's like,
Close.
but it's close to that. Yeah, and it's like, and this idea of like then you have it creates these market conditions where you have there's a lot of expensive Oregon Pinot Noir. Like at the point where we were coming into our first commercial release in 2011,
considering price point was huge.
Yeah, it was, and we would say like basically if you could land a Pinot Noir on the shelf for under $30, like you were like in a really competitive space.
Because the last thing the world needs is another $35 Oregon Pinot, regardless of how good it is.
It feels like that was really kind of like the entry mark. I mean, like, so you would have these maybe slightly more bottom shelf like Pinot Noirs that were being produced by I think they're good wines, but you would have like A to Z, who was like their mission was like they wanted, or like Erath by the late 2000s, where it was that Dick had sold it, and so Chateau Saint Michel, and like this idea of like they were making the kind of your more everyday Pinots that were in that like sub 25 zone, but basically everyone else, if you're like, even if you're an unknown, your entry-level Pinot Noir starts at $30 at like the basement.
Yeah, and so
we were
for us that was not tenable. I mean, that's just, it doesn't make sense. It's because, again,
I don't have any money.
We're lazy marketers. We're making
Like,
wine for ourselves, and so like I don't
have it. Like,
yeah.
and you can't like, and it's just, and I also just didn't at the time feel like I could comfortably like make the sales case that like our wine should be worth that much. Like, because like the wines are good, but we were still learning, and I think that they were like, I just don't think they were $30 wines. And even like today, it's still our Pinot Noir. Basically, if like
Depending on where you live.
yeah, depending on where you live, it still hits like 30 or under.
30 or under, yeah.
In Oregon, it should hit the shelf at like
27?
27,
Around
yeah.
there, yeah.
And so this idea of like, but it's interesting that you had all these baseline $30, $35 Pinot Noirs. And so it created these weird market conditions where then if you're a farmer and you want to plant grapes, of course you're going to plant Pinot Noir because Pinot Noir is going to get your highest tonnage price. And if you're farming, like why would someone bother farming an acre of Pinot Gris that they're going to sell for a third of the price as they are an acre of Pinot Noir? And so then you have high-priced Pinot Noir grapes, then from a winemaker's just costing perspective, needing to hit a certain dollar point, for the cost of the grapes that go into the bottle, and it created this kind of like weird like inflation. And then but then on the flip side, you also created this huge incentive to just plant
Pinot. Lots of Pinot.
And then now we've seen the kind of the flip side of that, of like what looks a bit more like a market crash
The great Pinocalypse.
Yeah, where you have then
Pinogeddon.
Suddenly we have like, I remember like when we had like winery that came out with like the $10 Pinot Noir, and you were like, whoa, like what
is it even made out of?
That, yeah, and like this is like now like 15 years ago,
yeah.
And now you've got Pinot Noir that is coming in like regularly, like at there's $15, there's the the $6.99 cans,
but there's
and $10 like or $12 bottles on the shelf, and it's
I don't know. It's kind of depressing if you spend any time looking at like the classifieds on winejobs.com for fruit for sale, especially near the end of the growing season, and seeing how many farmers have Pinot Noir on there and no buyers. And it's it's heartbreaking because growing a crop is not just obviously the work of one individual farmer, it's the work of many people throughout a growing season. It's the work of the plant and the environment and everything around it. And then to think that all of that work happened and then you're just going to let the birds eat it. And
or you're going to try to like dump it at a loss. Like, you see, and
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it, so like, I do feel that like that upsets me because I feel like that was kind of an artificial inflation that was fueled in part by just sort of a lot of this messaging of like, well, we are the Pinot Noir region, so this is what everyone does.
Yes, please move here, clear 25 acres of land, plant some Pinot Noir, make a $35 bottle of Pinot Noir that then will maybe not get purchased, and then your fruit not get picked, and then I hope you didn't spend your whole retirement on that. And that's kind of an interesting situation that we're in right now, where I don't feel like there's a lot of effort or time spent talking about it, and perhaps maybe having the shorter vintage that we had this year will help
stabilize things
and help people's inventory at large a bit. But certainly, the way that I see it is there's way too much Pinot Noir planted for the moment, and there's maybe not enough market for it. Even nationally, certainly not locally, and people are losing their shirts. And if you're an estate producer of grapes, you have to do something with that fruit that you grow. So then you have people who are more traditional established producers that have large estate holdings that are probably behind on inventory.
Yeah, and then but it all is about this idea of like, I think all that came out of the rhetoric of like being the Burgundian like region, and so sure, you can look at Burgundy and you can say, well, this is this landmass that is greater, larger than the Willamette Valley, and then and that it's mostly planted to Pinot Noir, but they've also been doing that for 600 years.
Sure.
So, and we've been doing it for not even 60.
Mm-hmm.
And
True.
so you're like that, but I think that there was this idea of like, well, we need to recreate that, and I don't think that is, maybe long term, so check back with us in 540 years and
When
see
we're known
maybe
as
where we're-
the world's best producer of Gewurztraminer.
Yeah.
Oregon.
Yeah.
Think Gewürz, drink Oregon. It could be it.
And I guess like the reason that we feel like that this feels like very like emotional for us is because I think this was also in a way where like Jim's dad ended up where he had these great grapes that he had put a lot of love and effort into growing, and then was kind of caught in a situation where he didn't have a place to put them or didn't have anyone who wanted to take them. And I think that and so it like is very heartbreaking to us to then see other growers that go through that same thing, and that will continue to increase until something else happens like in the market.
And there's been a kind of one of our goals as we've grown. So initially we started out just being an estate producer, just buying fruit from my family's vineyard, but we have again been entirely way too lucky in this and have been able to develop distribution partnerships with some really fantastic distributors across the country, people that we have no right being in their book. And on our first sales trip to New York, we realized like right away, kind of like, oh my God, we're gonna have to make more wine, which was a cool feeling to have when just a few years prior, when somebody said, how are you gonna sell a case of wine a day? I was like, I have no idea. And now suddenly, like, yeah, we got to make more wine.
Yeah.
And realizing that, the turnaround of wanting to just plant more grapes and then have those plants mature to the point where you can harvest fruit and make a wine is a fairly long-term prospect. So we realized that we're going to have to start buying fruit from other vineyards. And one of the focuses for us, especially, knowing the situation where my dad was at, was trying to find other growers that are in a similar spot, people that have beautiful mature vineyards, because vine age is a hard thing to replicate, and working with them to give them an outlet for what they grow. And so we've been really lucky to partner with a vineyard called Breckenridge, which is in Dallas, Oregon, which is the town where I went to high school at. And
thought you'd never be back.
I thought I'd never go back. I mean, I don't know what high school was like for most people. Jenny really liked high school, so I think that's her largest personality flaw.
Yeah. But I went to
She went to an arts college or high school.
Yeah, I went to like a magnet school, so it was like different. I went to like weird
I hated high school. I was like, if all of Dallas, Oregon went away, nothing of value would have been lost, which is dire. Of course, that's not true. Dallas has many great things. The drive-in theater, for example, is lovely, and Breckenridge Vineyard. So we were connected with the owners of Breckenridge through our friends, the Maloofs, and we've been working with more and more of their fruit. And in this last year, 19, we now contract for the entirety of the vineyard, which is fantastic. And it's been a great situation because it's allowed us to use our very recent profitability to be able to use our goal is like probably being two left to live. Is to try to use capitalism as a tool against itself, and so able to use money to incentivize people to help them or help us really. It's always about us to farm in a way that we feel better suits our interests. So by incentivizing growers to grow organically.
Yeah, because it's like that's not a inexpensive like ventures, and so it's like if I would rather have a cool old vineyard like Breckenridge that was planted more than 40 years ago and is this beautiful old site, and you can't replicate vine age, but maybe they're like farming like live, which was fine, but it is our preference that we want
organic fruit.
We want them to farm the vineyard in a way that we feel like is the most kind of environmentally responsible fashion.
But also we realize that you're telling somebody how to live in their own house, and that's a lot of an ask. So we at least operate our business, probably our bookkeeper and accountant hate us for this, but we don't want to rip people off. We would much rather pay people more money if it means that we can, have them do what we want.
Yeah, kind of the carrot and the stick there.
Yeah, for sure. Like I don't want to swoop in and try to undercut somebody. I'd much rather pay somebody more money, and that's how we've been able to try to.
And also not to like wag a finger at them like we don't like the way that you're farming, and then like try to change you. But it's this idea
because
that
they're awesome people,
right? That we want to grow together, and that we think that the vineyard itself is really special, and we like what they're doing. But this for us is where we feel like that we're helping the vineyard be the vineyard's like best, but then also get something out of it for us, which is that we're then getting to work with organic fruit. And I think that we would much rather take that approach with growers and work with farmers that, like, I would much rather work with a farmer like at Beckham Ridge or like Lucy and Tom at Sunnyside, where they live on the farm, that they're doing a lot of the work themselves, and they care about it. They have an emotional investment in it in a way that if you just own a piece of property, kind of like a bachelor farmer type situation, that maybe is not so much our speed.
We want to work with vineyards that look like they have character. Yeah, you know.
You say that because your vineyard is like that. Like, it's not like.
Come on.
Yeah.
You want it to have a patina.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so
And I
that's
think
the main goal.
that's yeah. And so like priority for us is working with vineyards that are old vine, which then as a result typically by default are then like dry farmed. Many of them are own rooted, and then that they have kind of an owner proprietor that is on the site working the land.
Wait, what was the question again?
How did we get here? I don't know. Yeah.
You got here organically.
Yeah, that's a good pun. I like it. He who would pun would pick a pocket. That's from Master and Commander: Far Side of the World.
Wow, stop.
It's a great movie.
Stop.
I think you might be the only person who ever saw that movie.
Yeah.
You might be the only one.
Him and
Oh
his
my
dad.
god.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad really likes. He likes the books. Excuse me.
Yeah. I wonder where you get it from.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so I think that's kind of where, we started as just working with Jim's parents' place, and then now we work with how many different vineyards this year?
I think we worked with 5
Yeah.
this year. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And it's been kind of an interesting growth thing for us. I mean, ideally, I don't want to work with too many sites, just because it makes harvest logistics get more and more challenging.
Yeah.
And I'm not that smart. I'm not good at math. Neither of us are good at math. So, like, we're like storyboarding it. We're like beautiful minding it, but it's like not very beautiful mind. It's like, I don't know.
Not beautiful.
It's not beautiful. No.
Yeah. But it has given us a lot more room to experiment, because initially I think that it was cool and good for our development to just work with one site. And Jim's dad, because like we were just discussing, planted mostly Pinot Noir and one little skinny bit of Pinot Gris, and then a very non-commercially like sized smattering of Chardonnay. And like that was it, and it's 15 acres, and it doesn't produce a ton of fruit, just given the specificity of the site and the fact that it's planted in this old Ocean 4, own-rooted, dry farmed, and so we just didn't have a lot of fruit. Like we had achieved our initial goal of getting him to work with other wineries that we felt like that did really good things with the grapes, but that meant that we were taking just a kind of small piece of the pie, and Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris, you can kind of only we got to a point where we were making like 4 wines. We made a light, we made basically like a white and a red out of both varieties, and then realized, boy, wouldn't it be nice to like
hot dogs 3 ways. I don't know. It's like, what are we doing here? We got to branch out a bit.
I know. Yeah, you're just like cutting up like, it's the Simpsons thing. And Marge has like the Chanel dress, and she just like cuts it up into like 1,000 different like outfits. But so it felt a little bit like that. And so I think I'm trying to think, what was the next fruit that we bought after?
I don't even remember.
Was it Riesling?
It was Riesling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing, as we've been able to work with a lot of these older vineyards, that's been exciting for us is remembering what going wine tasting was like when I was little. Not that I was going wine tasting, but that my parents were going wine tasting, and I got to sit in the corner. This is, of course, pre-tablets or pre-phone, so you just sit in the corner and be bored out of your mind. Just painful, just brutal, the worst. your parents say, let's go wine tasting, and you're 7, you're like, oh my God, please no.
My parents never took me wine tasting.
They didn't love you. And so, they love you. And so, when I would go wine tasting with them, just remembering the wines that existed at wineries at that time, there was a lot more of a focus on aromatic white grapes. And things like that. So it's been fun for us as we work with a lot of these older vineyards, finding what they have planted there. And so this last year, now that we have taken over all of Beckenridge Vineyard, they have a small planting of Niagara, which is an American grape. And, we think, God, what are we going to do with Niagara? I mean, I don't really have any real love affair with Welch's white grape juice. So what are we going to do? And so we came up with the plan. And so that is sometimes the element of this that I always find exciting is the brainstorming, the dreaming, and then hopefully, if you don't totally screw it up, the actualizing, which happens every once in a while. And that feels great when that happens. But so we now work with Riesling and Gewurztraminer and Auxerrois for this last year for the first time, and Gruner and Semillon.
Yeah.
And
we went on a little bit of a shopping spree. So you go from having just 2 grapes to then you want to kind of try the rainbow. But I think that having that initial basis and that was sort of the first experiment, first experimentation for us was that in a way kind of just using all the kind of art metaphor stuff of having the kind of constraints really helps to fuel creativity. And so I think that our no matter what of all the kind of weird kooky wines that we make, probably our most popular one is one of the first wines that we made, which is
by accident.
Yeah, originally of course, yeah. Which is Skin Contact Pinot Gris.
And yeah, certainly, I would say that it's our most popular
it's
wine.
Kind of our signature wine.
It's the wine that I enjoy making the most.
Yeah, but I think it says something about us as a wine label that our signature wine is a red Pinot Gris.
That was a mistake in making it.
Initially.
Yeah. Now it's very intentional.
Yeah.
I appreciate you not telling me what your plans are with the Niagara, so that when you come out with Niagara preserves, it'll be you can just say that was the plan.
Well,
that's what I should have done. Why weren't you here a few months ago? We could have done that. You would have saved us all this trouble.
No, we decided that so kind of the characteristics of Niagara is obviously it's explosively aromatic and fruity, but it's a really really high acid grape that doesn't get particularly ripe. I mean, it's ripe in the way that
the flavors are developed.
It's kind of like table grapes, ripeness, where it's you eat a grape, out of hand, and it's sweet, like a Thompson Seedless or something, but it's certainly not nowhere near the sweetness concentration that now we have trained or have grown wine grapes like Vitis vinifera to produce the kind of sugar concentration. So in that way, we realized it's perfect for sparkling production. High acid, low sugars, and tons of fruit.
So with the knowledge that it's perfect for sparkling production, we made a fortified dessert wine. No, just kidding. We made sparkling wine with it. Yeah. And so we made because we're always just following trends. So it's a pet nat.
Yeah. Also because it's a lot easier than trying to make it.
Yeah. The economics of making sparkling wine are absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
The excise tax on it alone is crippling. The actual packaging and materials that go into it are very expensive. So.
But it's super fun.
It's so much fun. But then, yeah, exactly. But then, I don't know how much we're going to be able to ask people to want to pay for sparkling Niagara.
We're going to find out.
Yeah, we're going to find out. So, at any rate, so the PetNet methodology at least allowed us to make it in the, I think,
the cheapest way possible.
Yeah, sure. But if you put on your marketing hat, it was definitely what the grapes told us they wanted.
Yeah.
That was what they wanted.
Yeah, but it was cool. It was, but it was fortuitous that we had these grapes available to us, because I don't think I would have ever gone out seeking Niagara, but I think that it really helped to reposition my brain and my palate for kind of the possibilities of wine and wine flavors. That I think that because everyone's taste for like everyone's first taste of like Welch's white grape juice, you're like, oh, this is like gross kid stuff. And so the idea that, or people have, the horror stories about like drinking like, Concord wine and things like that. And, but that there's this really heavy,
You're really decolonizing your palate, aren't you?
yeah, it's just like, because it's like wine is Eurocentric. I mean, by nature, by default,
Sure.
and but that we adopt all the trappings of it, even in the Americas, and kind of how ridiculous that is. And then we would take something that is like that natively grows, that there are not just Niagara, but all these other different types of Native American varieties that then people kind of discount as being not capable of producing fine wine. And I mean, I don't know if we're...
Remains to be seen whether or not this wine is fine.
We're capable of producing fine wine. But just this idea of opening yourself to the possibility of like, from an environmental standpoint, like growing a grape that wants to be grown here means that it's...
Far less prone to disease.
Yeah, way less input during the growing season. And maybe that becomes kind of a potentiality for the future of wine, as using more native or hybrid varieties.
So we just need to find more high elevation, old vine, organically farmed Niagara. That's the sales pitch. None of that, valley floor, young vine Niagara that people aren't interested in.
Right. Yeah.
This is very classy.
Well, there's some...
We'll put some gold foil and lots of embossing on the label so people know.
Yeah. Grape design.
Grape design. It's very expensive.
Yeah.
Chateau Fossil and Fawn.
Yeah, that'll be the fancy one.
So before I ask about the other things in the future for Fossil and Fawn, I want to back up for just a second. You kind of glossed over a little bit about starting to make wine. I'm curious. You both had a bit of a wine background from a sales and from a consumer side. Tell me about the process of actually learning to make wine and what it was that attracted you to want to do it commercially.
I would say that I am a walking, talking advertisement for Schmidt Community College. All of it.
Should put them on the billboards.
Should. Not just the grape growing and viticulture and the winemaking classes. All the stuff there. It's fantastic. I would say that being able to go to a school where you can learn about things that you're actually passionate about, which was my first time ever experiencing that as a human of any age, where you go there and you're like, oh my god, I don't have to learn about I guess I did have to take math classes, damn it. But other than that, if we exclude the math classes at Schmidt, everything is great.
But you're like there with a purpose. Like it's not like, I mean, I think that most people's experience of going through school, like going to college, like out of like high school, is that you're like, I'm going to school so I can figure out what I want to do, instead of going to school with the idea of like, this is what I want to do.
Sure. And ultimately the thing that I think drew me to the notion of winemaking on a kind of bigger picture level is I like to create things. I want to make something. And so there's probably that element of ego that's wrapped up in that too, where you want to make something that's a projection of you. So that's great. But I think element of winemaking that still always excites me, which I wouldn't have known this starting out, but I think once I experienced it, really hooked me, is the onset of fermentation. And every year when it happens, it's truly the most exciting thing. It's like that feeling of like your birthday or something like that, where like the anticipation leading up to it, like you're like excited, maybe more of a birthday when like you're little. And you're excited about it, and you're like, oh, it's gonna happen, and then it happens, and then the next day it just felt like it didn't even exist at all. It came and it went so quickly. And that's how I feel like that's what it is every year when you're waiting for the onset of fermentation. The grapes are picked, you spend all this time in the vineyard growing them, that's great, but then they get here and they're at the winery, and everything we do is native yeast. So it's that challenge of kind of shepherding fermentation and holding its hand, and then finally when you see signs of life, when you feel the push of CO2 and all of those things that go along with it, it's truly exciting. And I wouldn't have known that starting out. I wouldn't have known that when I started at Schmidt, but now every year when it happens, it's the most exciting thing. It's that's when it feels like spring has sprung. Like that's the feeling right there. That's the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and working with also cool artists to design labels and packaging that we like as well.
Yeah, so it kind of like it becomes like I guess I gotta like be good at this and make mine to like it's like you put truly the cart before the horse. Like it's I gotta make it like we have this cool thing going and now we need to like make the wine justify like the coolness of the package.
We're like buying clothes too small so that we'll force ourselves to exercise to fit into them.
Yeah, that does not work for me.
That's not great. So we're coming with great labels. So we're like, the wine should at least be passable.
Yeah, I mean, but I think a lot of it was driven by this idea of helping out your dad initially. And then I think once we got kind of that first taste of making wine for ourselves, then you get hooked because then it's the ego takes over.
It is, and it's and to be fair, I think I'm pretty critical of what we make.
Oh yeah, you're terrible
and
on yourself.
So the feeling of always wanting to somehow please myself.
Yeah, and I think there's also
and that's ego.
Whether you would want to admit it or not, I think there's also like the parental pride, like you're seeking that from your parents, that you're taking grapes that his dad has labored over growing and truly like bringing to fruition, and then you're going to make a wine from that then he feels proud of. That because it's also a reflection of his output. And I think that so for us, and that has also I think been a reason why we've kind of now strayed into these like using different grapes and making these kind of more kooky wines, where I think for us, like sometimes when we're out selling wine, the Pinot Noir is sort of the hardest pitch for us because it is the least, it has the least weird story. It's just kind of like, we make this wine in the most classical way to be a reflection of the fruit that your dad grew and of the place that you grew up. And so in that way, and I mean, that has informed some of the winemaking style that is kind of throughout everything that we do, which is a little bit more of that like older barrel, lower intervention, just trying to kind of coax it into being this representation of the sense of place. But that, it's because you want to say, this is me, this is my dad, this is where I grew up, these are the grapes.
That's true. And then I would say, but on top of that, I think the element that keeps me more and more excited every year beyond just the self-flagellation of like, I hate this, I want to get better, is the feeling of being inspired by people that you see making wines that you really love and trying to learn how they make them and trying to steal their technique. And so, I mean, for us, we've mentioned like those kind of maybe mentors that we had from those pioneering spirits in Oregon. But for us, like probably the single like biggest, I guess, hero that I have for modern Pinot Noir is probably Jesus Guillen. And so thinking about the wines that he made, and we had the pleasure of at least kind of two ships passing the night. We didn't make our wines at the shared space that he and his family were making their wines at, but we had friends that were, and so we would go in there and see how they were making their wines, and we're like, we right away, we're like, oh, I want to copy that. And Jesus was always somebody who was very giving of his knowledge and time, so I just messaged him. I was like, hey, Jesus, where'd you buy those fermenters at? And
tell me about them.
Tell me about them. And he was great. He was super helpful, and he gave me all the info we needed. And so we've ever since then been trying to copy how he made wine and failing miserably, but always trying at least.
But it's inspired by And there's other like and I think that is a piece of like having the conversation with other winemakers. Like I mean, we also started doing carbonic because of Corey Schuster, like
from Jackalope,
from Jackalope,
and we copied the way that he did it, and it worked really well. Or
like also when we were starting out and kind of, and like mentorship in a way, but I'd still see him more kind of as a peer because he's a cool guy, but like Vincent Fritchie also I think had taught us a lot about
He's more like a big brother.
He's like a big brother, yeah, for sure. Like of just being cool.
Yeah.
Like don't mess with it. Like you're gonna want to, yeah, you're gonna like he has like this I call it like the surfer philosopher Zen quality where he's like, yeah, like I don't touch this until like I can tell that like fermentation is like really like kicking off. Where I think that if you talk to other winemakers, they'd be like, oh well, you know, like I do this cold soak or I add this or I want to punch this, and he's just like, no, like just wait. And I think that has helped to like inform kind of our way of doing things, and also just helps to calm us down. I think it's very easy to get panicked in the winery.
It's fun to get panicked.
Yeah.
That feeling all the time.
Yeah. Harvest is always that. Like
It's
you think you have a plan and then
No, you don't have a plan. Your plan's garbage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
what you think and what it is.
I mean, we planned to bring in 50 tons of fruit this year, but because of all of the rains that we experienced in September and a variety of other factors, we have a grower that left their fence open, and they have cows that graze nearby. And the cows went in and completely, they didn't eat any of the leaves. It turns out cows are smarter than we thought. And they just went and like just stripped all of the bunches clean. So they lost probably, I don't know, a 2-acre block of Pinot Gris. And so out of the 50 tons we were looking to bring in, we only brought in 28 tons. So when you make a harvest plan where you're buying equipment based around the notion of 50 tons, and then suddenly you realize that nearly half of it is unnecessary.
Yeah.
After you've already spent the money and laid out the plan, then you're kind of thinking, oh.
I'm glad we didn't do 50 tons.
I'm glad that we didn't do
I don't
50
think we would be here.
Next year we'll do 50
like,
tons.
Yeah, that we've like had some time to actually prepare, because again, like what you think your preparation is and versus how it actually, you're never prepared for it.
Let's kill ourselves next year. 50 tons. There we are.
Done. Do it.
Done. But it's certainly one of those challenges, because you have certain wines that you're trying to make that exist in your lineup, but then now you're coming in so light that there was a point where we were at risk of not being able to make I think 2 or 3 different wines that we have historically made, because there just wasn't fruit for it. And so you have to kind of scramble at the end. But with the challenges of this year's weather, there was kind of like a point of very diminishing returns, where suddenly you came in light, but you don't really want to go out there looking for more fruit, because there's really, I think, a lot of concern about the quality of fruit that could be coming in later and later into the season. Which isn't to say that I feel pessimistic about the quality of the fruit that we harvested that came in. I mean, honestly, as part of the kind of get weird, suck lessness of it, I genuinely feel like the wines that we're making this year are the best wines that we have made since last year, at least.
Yeah.
And are probably better even.
Yeah, you don't go backwards.
You don't go backwards. And so there's that kind of like feeling, like I'm not down on it, but I do know that there will probably be lots of people that have, I shouldn't say lots, there will be people who have had a challenging year as a result of the fruit that came in last harvest.
But I think that like now as an industry, we're also better about like talking about that kind of thing. Because I remember
there's no problem here.
Well, but the flip side, you have vintages like the 2007 vintage, which was my second year in the business, and like having, it just took like a couple like interviews with some like harried winemakers who are like kind of in the middle of it when it was like raining during harvest, and suddenly like the entire vintage was like written off, and then it was this uphill battle to then go sell these wines. 2007s were and are amazing wines, and it was just that it was a really hard go of it. But I think that now we know to like be like, it's because it's also
close ranks, say nothing.
It's also not over till it's over. And the thing is I hope that this happens to other winemakers, and I feel like it does. We've talked to people about this, but there's always points harvest is so frantic, and you're losing your mind, and you're not sleeping, and you're like working super hard late hours. So you're not in a good emotional spot to be asked about how things are going. But then even like in hindsight, like during like at this point, we're like tasting through barrels and kind of seeing how things go along. And there are always periods where you taste a barrel and you're like, ew, like what what is wrong with you? Like, and a lot of it is just having faith in the fact that it's like, it's going through its own weird, awkward puberty just the same way that we did. And look how no wait, that's not going to go good. Like, look how we turned out.
Are you about to say, look how great I turned out?
Yes, yeah. But just the idea that
You look
it's
great.
like, yeah,
You
thanks.
did,
Yeah.
great
And
job.
that's why I said this is a bad analogy, but the fact that you, like, that there are always going to be these weird points just because of the magic of fermentation where you're like, I don't know where this guy is at. It's got some things to work out. And then eventually it does. And we had barrels like that last year where we were like, are we gonna is this gonna be like our first wines that we like maybe like are
Dump
gonna
down the
have to
drain?
get rid of, or like yeah, it was there was definitely those moments, and the wines ended up being better than the year before. And I think that we're experiencing the same thing where there were some moments where we're just like, oh, I don't like the taste of this. You were really freaked out about some stuff, and
Never, not me.
Never, yeah, no, you don't get panicked ever.
Even.
And then by the end of it, like already tasting them, we're like, yeah, okay, like I see where this is going. I think it's gonna be okay. And by the time we're ready to bottle, that's it. And in fact, you always say that you know when it's time to bottle.
Yeah, it's usually the moment that you know it's right to bottle a wine is when it tastes its worst.
Yeah,
I'm halfway joking and halfway serious when I say that, which is the fact that honestly, like
you're like fed up with it.
You're fed up with it, and I'm also dubious of any wine that you taste out of barrel and tastes too good because you're like, oh,
it shouldn't taste like that.
it shouldn't taste like that. It's going to go somewhere awful now. So
Yeah. It's better to have the wines that they're a little slower to come around.
Yeah, those wines that really ask you to be patient.
Yeah. I don't know where you get that idea from.
I have no patience.
Yeah.
So you guys made the 40 under 40 tastemakers issue of Wine Enthusiast recently. Tell me about that and how that came about, and if it meant something to you and what it meant.
My mom thinks it's cool.
Does she?
Yeah.
Cool.
She has the magazine on her little, like, her coffee table in her living room, the living room where you have like guests, it's a nice
The parlor.
the nice part, yeah, the place where the kids aren't allowed.
Like I'll just go back to my common refrain, which is that we've been incredibly lucky.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not like I feel like we deserve it, and certainly going and doing the photo shoot for it, really you're filled with lots of kind of imposter syndrome in the moment.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how did it come about?
I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of it is just that.
Our PR firm, which we have on retainer that we pay lots of money to every month, goes to the right kind of parties, meets the right kinds of people.
Yeah.
And, they just made it happen for us behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, stop. No. To be clear, we do not pay a PR firm. We do not pay ourselves. And so I think it came about because a lot of it was just, wine, just like so many other things, is relationships. And so it was just over the years, making friends with other people who we think are cool and fun to talk to. And they were people that then know people who then work at Wine Enthusiast and must have been really kind enough to like kind of put our name in a hat, I guess, kind of thing. I don't know their process for determining it, but I mean, I think a lot of it is just that over the years we like cultivated relationships with people who were like writing about wine or like blogging about wine, where you're thinking like I guess like I try to approach the feeling of like I am not like setting out to like become friends with like important people. Like I just want to be friends with people I think are cool and fun to talk to.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I think it's kind of back to the thing you said earlier about when you were starting out at Ponzi and you can go and visit other tasting rooms, right? And taste for free. There's that kind of sense of community that exists within the industry.
Yeah, and you just make friends with people.
You just make friends with people and you don't know where somebody's going to end up.
Yeah.
The industry's small and people move around a lot. And so, that element of making friends with people.
Yeah, and you just then they just become part of your bigger community, and hopefully you just try not to be like, just don't be a jerk, and and be
Right.
friends with people. And
You don't be that tasting room that doesn't offer tastings to people in the industry.
yeah, right, exactly, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Because you
just,
never forget that.
yeah, or you
Yeah.
just become, or you just know, like everyone has like, people have long memories, and so if you're
Yeah.
just nice to people and you are generous and they're generous and everyone just becomes
Absolutely.
friends, then it works its way out. And so we were just really, really stupidly lucky that we had.
Incredibly flattered.
Yeah, so like somebody
Still-
who said something really nice to someone at Wine Enthusiast, and our name was put in their hat.
100% don't feel like we belong.
Yeah, no, I was shocked.
Still am.
Yeah, because it was that weird thing where you get like an email that's like, you're in like the final pool, and we were like,
It's like Publishers
"We are?"
Clearinghouse.
Like, we are,
You're like, you get the thing in the mail that says I'm going to win $100,000.
Yeah,
And
and
you're
you're
like,
like,
yeah,
"Haha,
whatever. You send that to everyone.
Yeah, and then like
Yeah.
a week later, you get the like, congrats like letter, and you're
Yeah,
like,
it's you.
and you're like, has there been a mistake?
Yeah. So that was
Is
incredibly
there
flattering.
another Fossil and Fawn out there, possibly, waiting to sue us?
We can change our name to Knife Fight.
Yeah, and so yeah, then what really made it real was when basically they said, okay, now we've got to like book the photo shoot, and you're gonna fly to San Francisco and you're gonna do it, and yeah, it
And
was
we did it, and Jenny poured a lot of wine on me,
yeah,
and I didn't have a change of clothes, so I had to then go from the photo shoot to the airport in wine-soaked clothes, which I was thinking TSA would have a harder time with that because I smelled awful. But apparently that's a fairly common thing. I guess TSA
Yeah.
was like, no big deal, nothing
No
to see
problem.
here.
Yeah.
Walk on through. So
great.
yeah.
Yeah, and so that was it. But yeah, I mean, it's like it was super cool, and I feel like that it was an honor to be included, but I am still confused by it. Because I feel like the term like tastemaker is like super loaded. Like I don't know what we're doing that is like particularly interesting or innovative that like made us like stand out. I mean, I think that one of the elements that they highlighted that they liked was the fact that and this also just I feel like it's not going to age well, but it's like that like
Same.
we're really good at social media engagement, which just sounds dumb. It's like we're just ourselves. It's not like, again, we don't like hire a firm. It's mostly just Jim is a super talented photographer. He's really interested in, that's just part of his artistic practice just in his life, and so he loves to take lots of pictures and bug me taking lots of pictures, take pictures of the
That's
winemaking
true.
process, and then he needed an outlet for it, and so he just posted them on Instagram. And we are also, as you can tell, very weird people, and so we just are our weird selves on the internet and extremely online.
Trying to figure out how to get TikTok under control because I'm trying to get that sub 21 category.
Yeah, right.
The future
I know.
drinkers.
Yeah,
Not really.
exactly.
My lawyer would probably make me say that's not real.
That's actually not
That's not
working,
real.
yeah.
No.
But I think that for us it's fun, and so we're just way too online. And apparently that resonates with people, which is cool.
Yeah.
It's great. We've really got that like really extremely online crowd. Yeah. So that's it, and that's what they said. And because it's part of like the storytelling. Because and truly, I mean, like I hate to give like big technology companies, like Facebook, any kind of my respect, but I feel like that it does democratize the kind of promotional space in the sense that like we would never ever be able to pay or justify paying for like advertising in like a magazine or on radio or traditional forms of media, and for free, granted, you're the product, in social media, like we can create a page where we can have access to all these people who otherwise would never have a chance to hear of who we are or anything about us. And now, there are people who, for reasons I don't understand, like want to engage with us online.
If they only knew.
Yeah,
If they
right.
only knew.
I do feel like that is a bit of a disappointment when we get people who reach out to us from like Instagram, who like follow us and read our, obviously like limitedly curated version of ourselves, and then want to come out and like taste wine with us. And I think that there's always that fear that like we're not going to live up to it, that we're not exciting people in person.
If they only knew that I was just at home watching LCBO videos.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Some guy traveled the world drinking wine. Eh?
Yeah, you're cooler than that guy.
Yeah.
If they only knew you met at Whole Foods.
If they only knew we met
right?
at Whole Foods.
In a knife fight.
In a knife fight.
Yeah.
And on Facebook.
So what's next for you two? What do you see as you look ahead for yourselves and for Fossil and Fawn down the road?
I don't know.
Where are you in a decade?
What do I want to be when I grow up? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to have our own space at some point. We really don't have a
small goals.
We don't have a huge requirement. The second space we made wine at was pretty similar to where we're at now, in the sense that it doesn't have any floor drains and basically just kind of felt like a big closet. It was an old auto body garage, and now we're in a lean-to on the side of a barn and doesn't have any floor drains. And you know, I don't really.
So we've like haven't really gotten any further.
It has more garage doors, which is cooler.
That's true.
A lot of garage doors.
Yeah,
It's
have it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 garage doors. It's a lot.
That's a lot. It's we're garage door rich.
Yeah.
Except we're renting.
Yeah.
Having our own space, I think that getting to a point where the business itself is sustainable, where like because
We would like to be able to pay ourselves.
yeah, and where we could make a living off this. I think a modest living is the most realistic, in the sense that like, I mean, unless like a really like cool big like beverage portfolio wants to like come and give me like $15 million tomorrow, in which case I'd be like, yeah, let's sell out. I expect that this is just what we're gonna do and just have enough to get by on.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind
I'd
of.
like to quit my day job.
That was one of the things that like really always I think I've always liked about the Oregon wine industry is that because I also worked at Sokol-Blosser for a period of time too, but I loved the fact that when you considered the actual land holdings, the value of the winery and the tasting room they have there, that it's worth millions and millions of dollars. And that's awesome for them. They've worked hard and they deserve that. But I still love the fact that Alex Sokol-Blosser drove a Honda. And I was like, that just said it to me right there. I was
Yeah,
like, yeah. And that's
Practical vehicle, yeah.
right.
Like, yeah.
But that's like what my dream would be, to like have my own space, have our space.
You already have a
I
Honda.
was going to say, I hope your dream is to have a Honda.
I already have one. I'm already there.
Living his dream.
I'm already
Yeah.
there. So, just
But to have like I think that's like the goal is to make the business self-sustaining.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, which is, and I think that I think setting those kind of small realistic goals has been useful for us. So I mean, I think that our initial goal was profitability in 5 years. We made an 8, which I think is like a decent overage. I think that.
Yeah.
And so maybe by 10 years, so roughly 20 years in the business, if we can get to self-sustaining, I would feel really good about that.
And the thing is no one teaches you how to do business. No one. I mean, insofar as I know, I don't even know if an MBA program teaches you how to actually run a small business. Which I certainly have no aspirations to go to an MBA program. Which
yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
So the thing is that we've
business.
learned by all sorts of by
Trial and error.
Trial and error, surrounding ourselves with people who know more than us, and trying to figure things out. The thing of going from 50 to 100 cases is not a big jump. Going from 100 to 200 is not so big, but ultimately going from 2,000 to 4,000, the logistics
Get along.
involved with that suddenly get exponentially more complicated. And so as we're making these larger and larger jumps, learning how to navigate that and still make better wine every year and not also lose our minds. There certainly is that feeling at the end of harvest where I feel probably 10 years older.
Yeah.
Like
It takes
its toll, but it's still the best thing that I've ever done. And so
yeah, and the ability to do it work for yourself is something
oh
that
God, yes.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible employee. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
I really am. And so I'm not a great boss either. So the fact that I get to be both for myself at the same time every day, it's a blessing.
Yeah.
It's really the best.
For everyone's sake.
For everyone's sake, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
What about as you look ahead for Oregon in general? What do you see as the industry is? What is it going to look like in 10 years? What are you hoping? What are you fearing?
What does it look like in 10 years?
Well, so we're at this interesting time where you see a bit of contraction happening in other related beverage industry. So you see the closure of like Bridgeport, and you see
the beer industry.
a lot of
a
other
of
craft breweries that have opened in Portland, even in the last 10 years to fanfare and acclaim, have sold and gone out of business. And I kind of wonder if that's a bit of a precursor to things that we'll experience within other segments of the craft beverage industry. We are coming off of essentially, if you exclude 19, many large vintages in terms of overall production. And as I was mentioning, if you are an estate winery that has vineyards that produce fruit, and in those large years produce year after year after year of more fruit than you probably would want to handle, creates a situation. So we'll see probably some of the older, more established wineries are either having to get creative, and I don't think just putting your wine in a can is a creative outlet that's going to be the panacea that will help all those people. I also don't just think making cheap Pinot Noir is going to be the option that will help all of those people. It will be interesting to see. I would not be surprised if we saw, even amongst the kind of more established old guard, either closure, sale, or more likely sales.
Yeah, and you've already seen some of that. I mean, and I think that's, and it is an interesting thing that we talk about, like Oregon definitely having a little bit more of a modest, more kind of like homespun, feel for many wineries, that if you want to retire after doing this for 40 years, you're like, what are your options? And I think that there will be people who will be looking to sell either as turnkey operations, which then may be more advantageous for people kind of our cohort who will be looking to move into spaces that can be our own, or they will sell to larger entities. And I think that you've seen market consolidation, and I think that will probably continue in some part as maybe some of these older wineries just get to a point where they can't or don't want to make it work anymore. And I think that it'll, depending on kind of the state of where we're at with sort of the market at large. I mean, right now we're staring down the reality of tariff increases and trade war stuff that then will have enormous reverberative impacts on just the domestic market in terms of the distribution channels. We are distributors who are very concerned right now that they may go out of business, and so if this were to happen, it would decimate a lot of the domestic industry. And so I think that's very short term of seeing how that all shakes out.
I mean, 98% of our business is through distribution.
Yeah.
So, and most of our distributors, I would say, over 60% of their portfolio, in many cases much more than 60%, is represented by imports. And if suddenly that portion of their business essentially dries up, then it doesn't have a real positive impact for us. It's not like they're just going to start selling twice as much Fossil and Fawn wine because they can't bring in Burgundy. Yeah. That's not how it works.
Right. And so it's sometimes I feel like right now it's almost hard to think about the next 10 years when we in the hypotheticals, when we have this real thing that might actually have this real impact in the very near future. But and I think what I'm excited about right now is that because of this, for worse, kind of backlash against Pinot Noir, that you now have had this resurgence of all these other different varieties that have become more popular, people are more interested in, and I hope that will continue, and I think you'll continue to see
I hope so.
Development in that, and I think I think it is, because I think it's happening right now.
People, when they say, think Oregon, drink fill in the blank with a billion different grapes. In the same way that
Niagara.
Yeah, drink Niagara. In the same way that when you say think California, well, what is that one grape you're going to fill it in with? And of course, you could say
Cabernet
or Chardonnay, but there's so many others. And I feel like Oregon has the right environment, not just the actual physical environment, but in terms of the people who are here to make something very unique and diverse happen in terms of wine grapes that people are growing, styles of wines that people are making. And I feel that the younger consumer that exists now is probably more interested in brands that are looking for wines that have a respect for farming and have a unique story to tell, versus say a wine that is interested in prestige.
Yeah, or is just like luxury for luxury's sake.
But that being said, I'm also mindful of the fact that everyone gets old, and so I'm not as young as I once was, and so the cyclicality of these things as it exists, and who's to say that the children of this generation of people in my mind that are looking for these grapes that have or wines that have a real focus on specific place and farming quality, that the children of these people as they get older, as the way that they rebel against their parents, are suddenly now they're like, I want a gold foil, super embossed, incredibly heavy wine that tastes like 400% new barrel, and just makes my hippie dad die or something like that. Like, that's basically the way that everything goes. So our distributor in New York, he's been doing this for a long time, and he has enough I think knowledge to point out to us that when he first started going to France, he was saying that people at the time would always talk about like how small their yields were, and it's very similar here in Oregon. People, oh yeah, we get 1/4 ton per acre. It's real tiny, lots of new barrel, lots of concentration, and how now the people that he talks to are the exact opposite. That we get more yield. There's no new barrel, and all of these things. And his point to me was that obviously it's a pendulum swing, and I see that too. And for right now, we're riding that pendulum all the way, but. I think about, in the kind of inspiration of being true to oneself, somebody like the Eyrie Vineyards, who has managed to be the Willamette Valley's oldest, and still at the same time produce wines that are cutting edge and unique and interesting, and that tightrope act of being classical and then also forward.
Innovative.
And innovative. And for me, I think the way that they do that is just by being themselves.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
You're not trying to say, well, somebody comes into my tasting room and they really like sweet Riesling, so I made a sweet Riesling for them. I mean, that's great. That's a good business model for a lot of people, but
I don't want a part of it.
It's not what I'm interested in.
I like sweet Riesling, but I don't.
I love sweet Riesling.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, but I'm not making it for anyone else but myself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a happy coincidence that they happen to like it too.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys have been together a while. You live
9
together.
years.
You work together.
Yeah.
What's the secret to having this sort of successful relationship within the wine industry while you're?
Oh God. I mean, it's the same thing. I think probably for any functional relationship, whether it be personal or business, is open lines of communication and the capacity to let Jenny yell at me and tell me when I'm being an asshole.
Yeah, we go through this every harvest where Jim gets really freaked out, and so my response to that is to scream at him to be calm. And
it's pretty effective, honestly. It works every time.
Nothing like having someone yell "be calm" at you will
to make you really be calm. Yeah.
I mean, I just think a lot of it is just having
commonality of interests.
Yeah, having we have the same sense of humor. More or less.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know it's rough for me. But I think, and having the shared vision, which just sounds like very hokey, but I think it's true. It's like that. I think that if we had different aims for where we wanted to take Fossil and Fawn, I think that we would have a lot harder time. But I think that we're on the same wavelength as far as like the kind of wines that we want to make, the kind of things that we're interested in. It's having sort of the aesthetic alignment, but then also having the values alignment of like, I'm not in this to make, wine for this imaginary consumer. We just want to have fun and be dumb.
Yes.
Together.
Yeah. I think this is, not to be too precious, but we don't have children. We live in a studio apartment. It'd be challenging. But the wine is our child, and that's the precious part. Yeah. It's really, it consumes a huge amount of our time. I mean, we're doing this, in some portion 6 or 7 days of the week. In terms of, we're not necessarily at the winery 7 days a week, but we're doing something related to work 7 days a week. And that's.
And if we didn't have the passion for it, then
we're not in it for the money, clearly.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's your crappy band from high school.
Yeah,
is that
we're in a crappy band.
We're in a crappy band, and we're doing it for the fun of it, and we can't. The goal can't be to like become rich and famous. The goal is to hang out, have fun, and like make music, crappy music together.
What instrument do you play?
The triangle, obviously.
Oh God, I want a sousaphone.
Okay, you can be the sousaphone.
So this is like the VFW hall then?
This is it right here.
This is it.
got
Yeah. Yeah, with more garage doors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every year, one more garage door. Yeah, it's just like it seems so hard because it's like how do you make the relationship work? I mean, I think part of it is just like there's always going to be the work aspect of like making sure that we're communicating and trying to be kind and considerate to one another, but then also realize that there are going to be moments where that person is going to be an asshole. It's never me, by the way, but just that you have to be accepting of that person for who they are, and just like with the wines, they are our children in like the kind of silly sense that you can't force it to be anything that it doesn't want to be, and so you can only kind of steward it towards its best self, and it's going to do the rest for itself.
She's also the nicest person I know.
Make him say that.
That's true. Money, please.
It's a knife fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions that I have. Is there anything we didn't cover that we should have? Anything I didn't ask that I should have asked?
I don't know if you have enough batteries.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we better just cut it there.
Yeah.
We can always come back for part 2
Exactly.
another time.
There we
Yeah,
are. Exactly.
absolutely. We're here. Yeah.
I'm excited to see the time capsuleness of your overall project. I think that's really super exciting for both of us. Not just obviously for our portion, whatever, that's fine. But I like the idea of being able to capture. I don't think I'll ever listen to this because I think it will just make me die. But it's interesting because at first we were like, when this project was started, that we I think had like the reaction of like, oh man, who wants to just sit and listen to a bunch of winemakers yammer on for like hours at a time? I don't know, you may be questioning your life decisions here, as we often do. But just it is cool. Like we listen to interviews with other winemakers, like through your channel, and it's cool to. Oh my God! On the way down, we listened to Elizabeth Clark, and you're like, oh my God, she's so smart.
Like, she's a genius. Smart. And it was really cool that it's like getting other people's perspectives on stuff, especially because like we're out here in the sticks and we don't really get to like, I don't know. It's like day camp was really fun because we did get to have that more collaborative, like someone like right there where you can literally like walk across the room and be like, smell this or try this barrel or tell me what's wrong with this, versus here it's really just us with ourselves.
That's not true.
You have Gabe.
Yeah, that's not true. I have definitely sounding boards here. That's not true. But,
but
it's different.
But
it's
the
different.
wider, more people, the world at large here. So it's cool getting that perspective.
Yeah. Yes. Elizabeth Clark is so smart.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's unreal.
There are a lot of smart people. I don't know. That's why it's like the imposter syndrome is very strong with us. Like, yeah, we're bad at math.
It's why you get into winemaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
duh.
Yeah, right.
I assume there's a lot of it. A lot of bad math people making wine because
100%.
you sort of fall backwards into it. I get
it's
it.
like you use the metric system, and all you have to do is divide by 10. You're like, I can do that. That's easy.
Like, why didn't anyone tell me this before?
Yeah, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you sitting down with us, and thank you for the nice words on our project too. It is. It means a lot
it's
to
really
us.
cool. Yeah, it's really cool, and so we're very excited to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We'll go ahead and
Thank
we'll
you.
go and let you off the hook.